how I can use the funds to help give the produce to people who are more low income. So I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's part of the reason why I'm working with the city and other organizations, is because SNAP has a program, I don't know if it's a newer program, but it's a program called the Double Up Bucks program in Texas. And it's in other states as well. And what this program is essentially people who have SNAP/EBT cards, and they come to a farmer's market or they buy from me, they'll be able to get half off of their produce because of this program. So it's a grant-funded program. I believe it's federal dollars and as well as state dollars are allocated to it in order for SNAP people to be able to have access to healthy food. And so I'm really wanting to spread this program.
Hello everyone, welcome to Bartelle's Money Talk. I'm Johnny.
And I am Theresa, and you will be amazed at the guest that we have with us today. I was completely fascinated with her. So I tracked her down so I could bring her onto our show so that she could also fascinate you. Her career choice is so unique. I'm not going to mess it up. I'm going to allow her to introduce herself. Thank you, Amina, also for joining us on the show. Can you introduce yourself and tell the audience what your career is?
Thank you both so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here. My name is Amina Thomas, and I'm a geographer, and I'm also in a PhD program currently at UTSA studying environmental science and environmental engineering. And my area of focus is in sustainable food systems. So I work with helping to bolster and increase the local agriculture scene here in San Antonio by working with farmers, growers, and other producers to help market their products and services and help them go to market. So that's what I'm really passionate about, and I'm so happy to be here to share more information about our upcoming work, because my work also crosses into health equity and food insecurity, and so I'm really passionate about these topics, and so I'm so happy that you invited me to speak about these today.
Of course. Now, can you define food insecurities, please?
Yeah, so food insecurity has a couple of different definitions, but the basis of food insecurity is essentially, it can be a quantitative measurement or it can be a qualitative definition where it simply is just referring to someone's inability to go and get the nutrition and food that they need that will sustain them adequately. And so that's what we refer to as food insecurity. So it could be someone who doesn't know where their next meal is coming from. It could be someone who's living paycheck to paycheck, and they might have to go and sustain themselves on, different food items that are not very nutritious or giving them the proper energy or giving them all their nutrients and their different values that they need. So that is how there's a couple of ways where we look at food insecurity, but essentially that's the idea, is that people do not always know where their next meal is coming from or where they're going to sustain themselves with food.
Okay. Well, another thing that fascinated me about you, Black farmers. Can you tell the audience what your role is with Black farmers?
Yes, so I have my business, Nourished Seeds LLC here, and so I organize farmers markets. So I'm a market manager. So I'm the person that's in charge of working with property owners to get farmers and other producers to a location as designated day and time, so that we can have farmers markets, so people in the community can come out and shop and learn more about the local food system. And so, of course, I'm very passionate about Black farmers and other farmers of color being involved in these markets so they can have equal opportunity to come out and showcase their products and services. And of course, this goes back to food insecurity as well, and health equity, where people can see Black farmers and other farmers of color, and they can see themselves, they can relate, and they can be more maybe apt to come up and ask them questions and relate to them about cultural foods, especially with Black American cuisine, being able to question about different things that we eat. We have soul food, but people are looking to make those meals a little bit more healthier. And so they have questions about that. And so the people who are more apt to sometimes answer those questions are, of course, people from their same cultural background. So I'm really passionate about Black farmers. I come from a family of Black farmers. My great-great-grandmother was a Black farmer, female farmer in South Georgia in the early 1900s. I've just always grown up. We've always grown things. I'm a Georgia girl from South Georgia. I had a peach tree, growing up, so we always grew collard greens, tomatoes, everything, you name it. Just always has always been instilled in me to learn how to, grow your own food, where your food comes from, and to also know how to preserve food, not waste food, to make meals out of anything that you have. That's just what I've just been instilled with in my family. And so I'm really passionate about that. And so I've created this avenue for myself where I'm working with Black farmers and other farmers here in San Antonio with a community supported agriculture program. And what that is a subscription produce box service where people will be able to pay an amount every month, every week, bi-weekly. They can choose their frequency depending on their household needs, and they'll be able to come and support and buy from local farmers. And it'll be a great way to support our local economy and basically create an economy where we can have more local agriculture, and the farmers will be able to have more of a sustainable income source. And it'll just be a way for people to learn more about the food and just a lot of great health benefits. So I'm excited to bring this program to San Antonio, and I'm excited to have the backing of the City of San Antonio Sustainability Department with their grant, Climate Action Ready grant, and other support that I've gotten from San Antonio Metropolitan Health as well. And so I'm just really excited because I think that this is a service that people in San Antonio are interested in having, and it'll be very beneficial to the community.
So since you have the support of like the city of San Antonio, how does that support allow you to provide access to, like you were saying earlier, like low income or people don't have access to that, like the fresh food because they don't necessarily have the income to get the fresh food?
Yeah, so I think your question is asking about how I can use the funds to help give the produce to people who are more low income. So I'm so glad you brought that up because that's part of the reason why I'm working with the city and other organizations is because SNAP has a program, I don't know if it's a newer program, but it's a program called the Double Up Bucks program in Texas. And it's in other states as well. And what this program is essentially people who have SNAP/EBT cards, and they come to a farmer's market or they buy from me, they'll be able to get half off of their produce because of this program. So it's a grant-funded program. I believe it's federal dollars and as well as state dollars are allocated to it in order for SNAP people to be able to have access to healthy food. And so I'm really wanting to spread this program into the San Antonio community because we really need to utilize it so that they can see that the need is there, the want for this program is there, so it continues to get funded. Just like any other government program, they're gonna look at the numbers and see how many users are utilizing it and how much money and revenue is coming from this program. And we need to really get this program out there so people can know about it and people can have, and more importantly, people can have access to it. Because unfortunately in San Antonio, there's not a lot of opportunities for people to have access to this program. So I'm excited to, with my farmers market and my community supported agriculture boxes, to get this program to people who have SNAP and EBT so that they can utilize this and save money, especially in this cost of living crisis we're in right now.
Amina, this is so good, but I want you, because we talked about the Black farmers, and I just want to say to all the Black farmers, hats off to you, because in San Antonio, as huge as our city is, who even knew? We didn't know that Black farmers were here. So hats off to all of our Black farmers. Thank you for providing us with some good food, healthy food. And so I want you to briefly share with the audience that history lesson that you gave us about the slave owners and the rights. It grabbed my attention, and I want you to share it, please.
Oh yeah, so the conversation we were having at the business mixer, I was essentially got into the conversation about how people think with the Atlantic slave trade that African slaves were only, the enslaved were only for labor, that they didn't serve any other purpose. They were just there to, get commands and to carry them out. But that's not the case. There are several different evidence that shows that a lot of the crop production that was done in the early colonies were only probably able to be done because of the West Africans' knowledge of agriculture. Because a lot of the climate in the colonies were similar to the climate in West Africa. So they were able to utilize their knowledge, their food agriculture knowledge and technologies, and bring them over to the new colonies. And that's how we were able to create farming. And that's how the colonies were able to sustain themselves. So we know in the beginning, the survival rate in the colonies was not great. People were dying left and right from diseases. They weren't able to grow things. They were starving to death. It was terrible. But we look at now, going back to, well, how could people from England and these other, areas, how could they know how to, or learn how to, grow crops in these areas? And of course, it's trial and error, as they probably did, but also they had help from West Africans who had a lot of knowledge about food agriculture. And that's very evident in the similar climates of the New World, the colonies, and the West African climate. And that's how they were able to quickly come to these conclusions about how to effectively grow different crops. And so that's something that a lot of people should be aware of and know about. I think is really important and interesting. And it's something I'm really interested as kind of like a side quest in my own research to kind of learn more about. Because we have these different I have heard people bring it up about they have inquired about, slaves, the people who were enslaved, they probably have their own, way of living. They had to, of course, do their own food growing. How did that translate to, them being over here, being brought here? And that's how that's what they were utilized for. It was food, agriculture, technology, knowledge, and they were able to help grow and sustain the agricultural system here. And that's how we're able to build this this country that we're in, is because of the knowledge that West Africans had from food, agriculture, technologies.
Oh, see, I think that's so good.
Yeah.
But I want to talk too about the food insecurities.
Yeah, because that's huge.
Yeah, and so because you are in a PhD program, you had to do some research, probably a lot of research to even get to this point. I'm sure you're probably doing research now, but based on what you've seen, how can you speak on the health effects of food insecurity?
Oh, wow. Like, as you can imagine, the health effects of food insecurity are very great. Any research that you can see, any article that you read, it goes into it. There's direct correlation to people who are food insecure with different lifestyle diseases such as diabetes, high blood pressure, high blood sugar. Because, if you're not aware or you're not sure where your next meal is coming from, you're more likely to, just receive food or get food that's just going to sustain yourself. You're just trying to survive. You're not, you're in survival. You might be in survival mode, and you might not be able to have more, have access to healthier options. And also it goes into food costs as well. We're in a cost of living crisis right now, where food is increasingly going up in price and becoming really inaccessible to people who are low income. And so if you're not able to have access to these foods to eat healthier, then you're going to see a direct correlation to our rates of diabetes and other lifestyle diseases. And that's really unfortunate. I'm in the Health Equity Network, which is a coalition of different organizations here in San Antonio that have dedicated ourselves to help address food insecurity here in San Antonio. And I want to speak especially to the African-American community here in San Antonio. We have the highest food insecurity rate of all the ethnic groups here in San Antonio. Our food insecurity rate is 25%. So much so that the Health Equity Network, along with San Antonio Metropolitan Health District, has a targeted goal of targeting the African-American community to help to lower the food insecurity rate. Because we know we lower the food insecurity rate for African-Americans in San Antonio, the overall rate is going to drop because we overrepresent the food insecurity rate in San Antonio, even though we're not the majority minority here in San Antonio. So that's what I have come to know about San Antonio. I've been here for 3.5 years, going on 4 years, and unfortunately, it's not looking really great. I just saw a video detailing about how even fast food has gone up in prices, and I kind of have mixed emotions about that, because I want to be very understanding of people who, because there's a such thing as food deserts / food swamps. Sometimes fast foods are the only access that people have to food in their neighborhoods, unfortunately, and that's done on purpose, in certain cases. And so I want to be very understanding of that fact, but fast food prices are actually rising. Some people see this as a bad thing as well, because that's also just creating more inaccessibility to more convenient food options. And so that's creating another barrier to people, getting access to any food. But of course, in my opinion, looking at San Antonio, we need more healthier food options in neighborhoods where there are designated as food deserts / food swamps. That's something I would like to see more. And also, along with it, nutrition education about how to utilize these produce and these foods. Because it's one thing to bring these foods to these communities, but if they have been chronically not utilizing them or eating healthy for a long time, they're going to need an introduction to nutrition education and how to utilize these food sources. How to pickle items, how to store items so they last longer, as far as produce, meats. These are certain skills that, unfortunately, with the advent and the incoming of convenient food and fast food, we kind of lost touch of. People don't cook at home as often. We've seen this in a lot of studies where people have a lot of their budget goes towards takeout rather than cooking their meals at home. So these skill sets, as far as like how to preserve food, how to cook food, and how to make it last longer, that maybe we learn from our grandparents or our parents even. These skill sets are not being passed on to the generation, because our new generation unfortunately only knows drive-throughs and convenience options, and so that's really unfortunate. But I also want to bring up another correlation is there's time poverty, because we're living in a cost of living crisis. A lot of people are having to work maybe 2 jobs, and they don't have the time to possibly cook at home, and that's why they're going to these convenient food options. And so it's really a macro effect. Food insecurity and health equity, it does not exist in a silo, as we're probably all aware. Everything affects it. The cost of living affects it. Our access to health insurance affects it. Our lifestyle, our family dynamics affect it. And so we have to take into all these elements when we're going into the communities and trying to help decrease the food insecurity rates, because we have to tailor these programs and our methods to what these communities actually need.
So Amina, I got to go back a minute. You said food desert. Could you kind of explain what that is? Because I'm sure
we never heard of that.
Yeah. Could you explain that?
Okay, perfect. Yes. So a food desert is actually I'll tell you what it is, and I'll tell you why I don't like the term and why me and other academics don't like the term. So food desert, it basically is a way of a calculation actually that the USDA does. They have a food desert map. So you can Google like food desert atlas, USDA, and their map comes up. So it's a way of showing a neighborhood that does not have a grocery store within, I think it's about 5 to 10 mile radius. And it also takes into consideration if the people in those neighborhoods have access to vehicles. So the percentage of people who have access to transportation. And also some papers will look at also public transportation as well. And so that's a food desert. So a food desert is like it sounds. It means that there's nothing there. It's bare. It gives you those type of imagery in your mind. But that's why I don't like the term. I see why people, and because I'll tell you, the term actually is not an academic term. It actually came from an interview that was done in England when a grocery store in a neighborhood shut down, and a reporter was interviewing the neighbors in the neighborhood. And one of the neighbors came on and they said, "Oh no, the grocery store has shut down. Now we're in a food desert." And that term stuck because it caught the headlines. And so now that's what we use. So when we say food desert, that's what we're relating to. I also brought up food swamp. So sometimes people say, as I just mentioned with food deserts, we're looking at grocery stores and typically looking at supermarkets. So they're looking at a specific square footage of a store to make it a supermarket. So we're not looking at mom and pop small shops. We're not looking at corner stores. We're looking at only the presence of supermarkets. And that's also, I think, is a mistake on the part of our calculations in food deserts, because that leaves out the mom and pop shops, the other small, and they might not even be small, but the other ecosystems that exist in a neighborhood that possibly are meeting some of the needs of that neighborhood, but it completely can't erase them. And so it invents this ability for people to begin to believe that a supermarket, a huge store, is always needed in every neighborhood that doesn't have one. When in reality, what we've seen, especially over time in the last 2 decades, is that mom and pop shops have closed and small businesses had to shutter when these larger grocery stores have come into neighborhoods. Because these larger grocery stores, they have more resources. They're able to buy at a more mass scale, and that gives them access to lower prices. And of course, they have more government subsidies as well. And so it's not an even playing field. So these small mom and pop shops are not able to compete. And that's why we only go to 1 or 2, especially here in San Antonio, major grocery retailers. And that's it. They probably have about 98% of the market share, maybe even more than that. And we know in the past it was not always like that. And then also I want to also bring up, I brought up another term, food swamp. So food swamp, it's a response to food desert, and it says, well, these neighborhoods that you call food deserts that don't have supermarkets, well, they have all of these fast food restaurants. So they do have food in them. They're not a desert. They have food sources, but the food sources are not what we would like them to be as far as quality, because they are the fast food chains. And so people refer to neighborhoods that have a high influx of fast food restaurants or other type of fast casual foods that aren't like Whole Foods or healthier food options. they'll refer to those neighborhoods as food swamps. And so that's in the literature. But I personally, I use the term because that's what people are really acclimated to. A lot of people who work in this area have used for years and years and years. And that's how we refer to it. However, I have my own reservations about the term, and I want to be mindful about not discounting the mom and pop shops or the other corner stores that are meeting some of the needs of those neighborhoods by just saying, oh, because there's no supermarket there, it's a food desert.
Yeah, because I mean, I can remember growing up too in the country, and we used to have a small mom and pop grocery store that we used to buy food from. If we didn't grow it, we would buy like meats and stuff from there, right? So that makes sense. And then eventually, when everything started getting kind of big, you start getting these big grocery stores and food chains and stuff like that. Then the mom and pop stores kind of went away. So yeah, you're right.
Well, what I want to ask you, based on your research with the food deserts, is it based on race or is it based on income?
That's a good question. So food desert analysis in and of itself, the atlas is not based on race or income. However, when we do overlay income and race data on top of food desert maps, we see a huge correlation. So that typically means the more poor and minority neighborhoods are more than likely food deserts in an area, where the more whiter and more affluent neighborhoods are not food deserts.
Okay, so if we have someone that's in a food desert or have a family member or friend in a food desert, do you have any kind of recommendations that they can use to help them to get fresh produce into their home?
Yes, definitely. So there's a couple options they can do. I would say, especially to someone who's in a neighborhood and maybe it's a neighborhood association as a formally organized group, I would say that there's a way for them to do a market analysis where they can either do it themselves or bring in an expert, because there are retail consultants that do this, that go into a neighborhood or area and they scope out the area and they do their own research and they determine whether or not a grocery store would be a good fit in the neighborhood. And so I would tell them, especially if they do have the resources or if that's possible, they can start looking into that, because I think that's a good place to start. And that, because you can also start with that data, you can use it to entice other grocery store chains to come to your neighborhoods. I recently started working with Main Street America here in San Antonio. They run the Revitalized SA program here. It's underneath the City of San Antonio's Economic Development Department. And so it was a selection of 20 community members that were selected to get a $10,000 grant in our cohort. And we are tasked with the task of going into a neighborhood and revitalizing it using that $10,000 grant, as well as leveraging other resources as well. And one of the things that I've been learning from Main Street America is that this is part of the work that they do. They go into different neighborhoods or cities and they do these analysis and they see what the neighborhood needs. And they're able to use this market data to go out and help, because people don't may not realize it, but even if you're not a part of a neighborhood association and it's just you and a couple of neighbors or just you yourself, there's nobody stopping you from calling Whole Foods and asking them, hey, look, we have these people in these neighborhoods. We don't have a grocery store here. Would you all be interested? And there's nothing to it that you might get a phone call. It might open up a conversation. And I was shocked because I didn't know how those type of things work. I grew up in a rural area, which is a very small town. So I had no idea about the inner workings about how do you come and recruit businesses to a neighborhood? Like, how does that work? But that's a process that can happen from the ground up. You don't have to wait on your city council person or any other elected official or any neighborhood association. You and your neighbors or you yourself can do it yourself. And a lot of people who are part of the Main Street America organization, that's what they do. They know a lot of the data about their neighborhood, such as income, family size, different things that a grocery store would be looking at to see if they want to invest in that area. And they learn this about themselves and they go and talk to the grocery store directly and ask them to come to these areas. And I've seen where people in California have brought over a Whole Foods to their neighborhood, and they've created also the Whole Foods is in a multi-use development, and there's a community center attached to it where they also do like health nutrition classes. They have a basketball court, they have yoga. And so it's just all about creating a space for yourself and making what you want out of it. And so it's really empowering, And so I feel like people I feel like people will really benefit from knowing that you have a lot of power just being an active and engaged person in your neighborhood to go out and talk to these corporations yourself, especially if you can get the backing from your neighborhood, and especially if you have the data and the market research to back it up.
Okay,
Wow.
so yeah, if we have a listener, if you are living in what they are calling a desert food area
or
swamp food area, Amina just told you what you can do. Get your friends, get your neighbors together and make the phone call and do it yourself. You don't have to wait on the councilman to do it. And so,
Yes.
Amina, to say to you, you don't know it because you are the person, but you are such a big deal.
Mhm.
You are such a beautiful and a unique person. And I'm just being transparent. Like, meeting you was impactful to me. And one thing that you said that now when I go into our major retailer here, after you taught me this when I met you, it seems like common sense, but it's not common sense. And when we walk into our major retailer here, it's beautiful, it's clean, it's a great place to go. That night you shared with me, because I'm like, well, my apples and my oranges, and they look fresh, they look nice to me. But you were like, well, you got to think about, they were transported. They stayed in a box. You don't know how long. So are they really fresh? So that was enlightening to me. Really, I don't know if it's because I live in a box. It wasn't common sense. But I just want you to speak on that a little bit, to let people know that just because you walk in a grocery store and it looks so fresh, like they just pulled it off the vine, that is not the case.
Yeah, so thank you so much. You're so kind. But yes, we were talking about, I believe, the seasonality of food, and we were talking about when you go into a grocery store, why you see certain foods, year round. And because one of the challenges that local food agriculture proponents like myself have is that we only deal with in-season produce. So we have to break the news to people that, well, the peaches that you like are not going to be around, year round. You can only buy them at a certain window when they might be used to buying them year round. And so it just goes back to people's connections to food. People are not as aware of seasonality of foods because we've gotten so used to just going into a major retailer and being able to select whatever we want. And that's how major retailers are able to sustain themselves, and how that's how they become the powers that they are. They've given people what they want, and they've been able to extend the life cycle of these produce and doing a multitude of different things. And one of the things they do is, we were speaking about, is the transportation. If something doesn't grow here in Texas, it has to be transported here. And a lot of times what happens is it's also possibly, depending on the price of a produce, is possibly picked somewhere, and because it's in season, the price is probably low at that time for the produce at a wholesale level. So what the major grocery retailers will do is that they will freeze or they will preserve that produce in an area while that produce is in season. Then when it's out of season and the demand is high because you can't really find it anywhere else, that's how they're able to extend and create more of a profit margin for themselves. And so sometimes, a lot of times, you see the produce on the shelves actually been preserved by freezing or other methods in order for the retailer to have a higher profit margin, because they're selling it at a time where it is not in season and it's not as available. So that's how they make more money on their profit margin.
My oranges be cold sometimes.
Yeah. cold and not flavorful, because they've been sitting in the freezer and they're not as sweet as they would if they were in season.
Okay, you got a big question for her, because I got one.
Well, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Tell me about, because I'm like, no, I'm not buying it, because how are they going to prove to me if it's organic or not? So what do you think about these grocery stores charging double the price because they got a sign up to say organic? Can us believe that it really is organic, or they just putting that up there to get double the money?
You are definitely right to question why organic is better than a normal or standard produce. That's a question a lot of people have, and the answer I have you is really complex. So there is a certification process for organic produce. So they have to go through a certification process. They have to go through inspections. They have to make sure they're not using the chemicals or any of the methods that are on that list by the USDA or any other governing bodies of where they're growing and producing and harvesting that produce. Yes, that exists. But there is, of course, as you may have seen, discourse about whether or not organic is worth the price. Worth it in terms of the studies some studies have not shown that it has gotten a greater benefit. Others have not, but it's not really a retailer. I will say this is why my answer is not as simple. And this is not because of retailers. This is really because of our soil health. So this goes into the environmental science of our food production. So I don't know if you'll have been seeing, but a lot of our soil has been depleted over time because of mass farming in the same area, and because farmers have not done what we call regenerative farming practices. And basically what regenerative farming practices are is essentially a way for you to farm and to produce your produce or your crops in a way that keeps the integrity of the soil there. You don't deplete the soil, you keep it there. You basically do methods that can help you be able to have a sustainable soil, because we're nothing, especially looking at soil farming. I know we have hydroponic farming now, which is more water farming, but our soil is still important. We still have root vegetables and things we have to grow in soil, or are grown mostly in soil. And so looking at the difference between organic or not, yes, I have seen different things about, unfortunately, organic. But organic, I will say the concept of it is a very noble concept. It's basically saying that the produce is not having all these pesticides, all these different chemicals on it that regular produce would have on it. And the reason why that produce is having those chemicals put on there is not for a bad reason. It's essentially to keep off pests and bugs, and to keep that produce protected while it's in the soil. They're using those chemicals for an admirable reason. However, people are well within their right to question, and we have seen, unfortunately, that those chemicals are not the healthiest for us to be ingesting. At the same time, they're repelling the bugs and all the other pests from the crops, so they're also not the best for our system as well. So that's where organic certification comes in. But unfortunately, the price point for organic, I do see, is a barrier for people to not have access to it. And unfortunately, I will see, like in major retailers, even with me getting advice on my produce box, is that there is just a formula. There is a rhyme or reason, but it's just, unfortunately, it's the economics of food, where unfortunately it comes to the fact of there's a subset of the population who are able to pay more for organic food, and there's a demand there for it. So therefore, that's why organic is thriving, and that's why they're able to keep the profit margin high. But unfortunately, that profit margin is not attainable for everyone. When I think, and maybe y'all agree, that everyone would benefit from not being able to, from not having access to those chemicals and pesticides put on normal farming techniques. And that's the unfortunate thing about organic, is that it's very inaccessible to people. Whether or not it's worth it or not, honestly, sometimes sometimes you have to go by crop and see, because sometimes there's a lot of literature out there, abundance of literature, in food agriculture, about whether or not certain crops benefit more from having this organic certification than others. Because I would give you even an example with hydroponic farming that I brought up earlier. So hydroponic farming is actually a farming practice where you don't use soil, you only use water. So you basically use like a greenhouse type of structure, and you plant your plants like you normally would, and then you only use water. And actually that method uses less water than soil farming does, because as we know with soil farming, the soil is also drawing up that water as well as the plant. But with hydroponic farming, you're able to directly only water the plant. And so this is coming up as a more sustainable option for farming. And so, but even with hydroponic farming, because it's not soil farming, a lot of hydroponic farmers, depending on what they grow, they can't be certified organic, even though they're only using water, they're maybe only using organic fertilizer. But because they're an alternative method, it's not a new way of farming, but it's a more up and coming mass way of doing farming. They don't qualify for organic certification. So that's the thing, and even with some of the farmers I speak with, there is a barrier too. And we go back to like Black farmers of color, and farmers who are from maybe a little more low income background and small farms with not as many resources. That organic certification is a cost barrier for a lot of farmers. So your farmer might be using organic methods. They might be using organic fertilizer, not using anything that's on that list, but they don't really see the profit in getting that organic certification because it's too much of a price barrier for them. So that's where talking to your local farmers, having that relationship with people who are growing your food, having these conversations, I think that would also help people as well. But I would tell people to do your own research about organic certifications or not, because there are some controversies about them as far as like what's deemed organic and what's not, because some crops and some methods toe the line and they don't keep to that original, idea of what we would think organic can and should be. And so you just have to have your own, knowledge and what you're comfortable with. But unfortunately, that profit margin for organic food is really high, and it's unfortunately creating yet another barrier for people to feel comfortable with the foods they're eating.
That's good. Do you have another question for her?
Go ahead.
I'll let you go ahead because I've been hogging her.
You've been doing good though. So this is we want to keep the audience informed, because this is a very important topic. Because really and truly, when you think about food, right, and access to it, you really don't think about not having access to the proper nutritional food that you need, right? So my question is, how can we help like the different communities help mitigate some of that non-access to the food? We as people help mitigate some of that so they can have access to fresh foods and healthy foods, those options that's out there.
Definitely. There's a lot of different ways you can help. There's, ways you can donate money to organizations here that feed people who are in need. There's organizations here, as we all know, like churches, schools, different community organizations that have food pantries where they collect items like canned goods, non-perishable items. Sometimes some of them have refrigerators where they can collect, more of the milks and more of the perishable items. And so that's a way to support people who are food insecure. There's, of course, a lot of charities here, 501c3s, organizations that work in food insecurity here in San Antonio that you can help support. But really it comes down to, if you were to ask me, like, what is the root cause of food insecurity? It's the cost of living crisis. We see it, in the data that we have, is that obviously when people are struggling to make ends meet, they're having these trade-offs. In the information that we presented, we being the health equity network that's underneath San Antonio's Metropolitan Health Center, we presented a document that showed that people often have a trade-off. They have to choose between paying for food or paying for the utilities, paying for food or paying for rent. There's a trade-off of that because people see their rent and their utilities as more of a fixed price, often or not, but food is typically one of the first things to go when people begin to struggle. And we know that wages have stagnated. San Antonio has one of the lowest median incomes, I think, in all of the major cities in the United States. So that's really the root cause of it. I mean, until people are paid more, until we have livable wages, we have jobs here that have better health benefits, in addition to better paying salaries, we're really not going to see long-term sustainable effects on food insecurity. And that's just the nature of it.
Wow.
Okay, yeah, that gave me goosebumps. I didn't even know that.
Yeah, I didn't either. That's why I was like, what?
Yeah, so thanks for that statistical information. And before we let you go, I want us to just address one more thing. And so I was raised by my grandparents, and I'm from South Carolina. And back then I didn't really understand because it felt like it was just part of what we did. But my grandparents used to have a beautiful garden. And the garden was big enough to where my grandfather had a tractor, he would plow the dirt up and we would have to shell the beans. And that was just the way of living. But I didn't know how important back then it was, like, to grow your own food. But and when you mentioned canning, my grandmama used to can stuff. But girl, I didn't learn how to do it because she didn't really require me to do it. But see, now that I'm older, I wish that I would have had the self-motivation to learn. And her garden, it was just beautiful. We had everything out there. And so if you can give one word of advice to someone who says, I can't afford to eat healthy or I can't afford fresh produce, can you tell the audience one or two things that they can do to get something fresh?
Definitely. Yes, I want to tell you that it's still time. You still have time if you want to learn these things. And that's something that I think we're trying to do in our nutrition class. We're trying to incorporate more of that food preservation into our cooking classes, not just giving recipes, but also how to preserve food, because that's really important for people as well. But advice, yes, as far as like typically frozen produce, if you can't afford like fresh produce, typically look in the frozen aisle. Look in those frozen refrigerators in your major retailer store, your grocer. Those are typically either lower than the canned vegetables that you find, or the vegetables that you find out on the floor of the produce section. It's typically a lower price. So those can help you save money as well. If you're a SNAP EBT user, look into areas where there's a double up bucks program where you can utilize it here in San Antonio. They have it at Chicho Boys, for example. So you can utilize it there. So you can get your half off on your produce. You can double up you can make your money, go farther. That's another thing. As we just talked about, learning to preserve your food. Me, for example, I'm a single household. It's just me and my dog, but I'm starting to buy in bulk. I don't have a membership like a Costco, or because it's not worth it because I'm just a single person. I did the math. But even when I go to a major retailer store, I bought like a 5-pound of ground beef, and I have it in my freezer because it lasts 3 months. I can eat off of that for the next 3 or so months. That's just by preserving it correctly. I can cook, I can make dinner out of it. I just made ravioli with it tonight for dinner. I can have breakfast patties in for the morning for breakfast. Just buying something in bulk and making it last, that can also help with saving on food as well. And also pooling your resources together. I brought up Chicho Boys, but there's other, areas here we can buy produce in bulk. It might be too much for your household, but maybe you have a friend or your siblings or your parents. Maybe y'all want to all pool your money together, your resources together. Because that's something I feel like we don't do a lot more. We don't do a lot of that nowadays, as far as like pooling our resources together and coming together to save money. That's one of the ways we can do that, is going to these bulk produce places and buying a lot of produce, but then splitting it up amongst maybe your neighbors or your siblings or your parents, and saving money that way. And so there's different methods that you can use to help save money. And unfortunately, in this cost of living crisis, we're going to need a lot of these methods for the near future. And so that's just some of the things that we can do. But like I mentioned, I'm always going to say livable wage. That's the main thing that we need to have. We need a higher livable wage. We need better access to healthcare benefits for people in San Antonio and people around the United States. Those are going to have a long-term, lasting, sustainable effects of people having an increasing health span, because we have lifespan, the number of years we live, but as we see in the United States, our health span is actually very low, because we see that people are having debilitating health issues in their last decade plus of life. But we want to increase our health span as well. And so those are some of the ways you can do that and save some money doing it.
All right.
That was great. I'm guilty about not thinking about pooling money together, because now in the 20th century, everybody's so busy texting, emailing, and nobody think about it. So thank you for sharing that nugget. That was very good.
And that was old school back in the day when we was growing up in the country. And, they did stuff like that. Pool money, grow gardens, share stuff. That was just a normal thing.
So I'm hoping that because you're giving that spill, I'm like, if it's just one person that would do that, that would be a job well done. If we could just get people who can't really afford it, if they can just bring their money together and buy in bulk so they can eat a little healthier, that would be great, because our goal with our channel is to help people have a better financial future. Well, you want to be able to live so you can enjoy that finances. So in order to be able to live, you got to eat healthy. So Amina, I want to thank you personally so much for giving us your time. It has been amazing.
Thank you, Amina.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank y'all so much for inviting me on your platform and just being so welcoming to me. And if there's anything I can do for you all, anything y'all need, just please let me know.
Okay, we will. You got anything else you want to say?
No, thank you, Amina.
Oh, this is important. Go ahead.
I was about to ask her, how can someone contact you if they want to reach out to you?
Yes, because somebody just might reach out to you.
Yes, and kind of reach out to you.
Definitely. So yeah, I'll just point you to my website, because on my website, it also has my Instagram. If you scroll at the bottom, it has the Instagram icon. So you can click on that, and then you can message me there on Instagram. My website is www.getnourished.com, and nourished is spelled NOURISHD. So there's no E in there. So it's getnourished.com. And you can also sign up for my community supported agriculture box there. I'm collecting emails right now. So you'll be the first notified when it comes out in a couple of weeks. So I'm really excited because we're getting there. We're slowly but surely getting there. I feel like I've been working on it for a long time, but with all things, it takes time. And then you can also connect with me on my Instagram as well, where I'm at Nourished Seeds, NOURISHD SEEDS. on Instagram, and you can come and I post there regularly on my stories and posts and reels. You just come and interact and engage in conversation with me, and just we can continue the conversation there.
Well, again, thank you, Amina, for joining the platform on Bartelle's Money Talk. You provided some great content, and I hope our listeners will take heed and understand the content that was provided. And we really appreciate you again, Amina, for your time. And we look forward to talking to you again on Bartelle's Money Talk.
Definitely. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you.